All right. I guess we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Technically Speaking webinar. Today, we are going to do something slightly different, mostly because Kate isn't here. So today, we are going to have Kelly, who is going to be our co-host. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Schuster. I am a software developer, and I also give technical talks all around the world about Android development, which is my current favorite type of development. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me co-host, Juby.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly, for stepping in, because sometimes it takes more than one person to run these things, especially since we have our Q&A module running. So we need somebody to be speaking and the other person keeping an eye on the questions, which means that everybody, please ask questions. I guess you'll be asking me now, like, what questions? I don't even know what this webinar is going to be about. So let me introduce you to our guest, Dave Zwieback. He is the author of the book Beyond Blame, and which is basically it's a fictional situation in a sense, because it's a little bit difficult to bring in a new situation and then not blaming people from the get-go. So the idea is that if something goes wrong, a lot of us will host postmortems, and then somehow they end up being a blame party and people just point fingers and you don't really learn much. So I'll get, I think Dave is going to get a little bit into more details on what the book is all about, but that's the basic idea. So Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the topic?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you for having me here.
Mm-hmm.
And the topic is really about learning and learning more deeply. And not only learning when things go badly, but also learning when things go well, and really understanding the conditions for each one of those outcomes. The issue that's kind of front and center in our book is that most of the learning that we do is quite shallow. We get to a very comfortable story, which usually involves a villain or a hero. So if something went bad, then we say, oh, well, this person is to blame. If something went well, then we say, oh, that person must know something, and there's something about that person that contributed to the success. And that story feels good, and done, we kind of move on. And in the meantime, we basically have left a ton of learning on the table. And the way we know that is you could mentally sort of take that particular person out, either the villain or the hero, and ask the question of, could this still happen, right? Could the failure still occur? Or could we still be successful? And if the answer is yes, then that's the difference, right? In the sense that then we really want to understand, like, okay, well, if it's not really only about that person, then what else is going on, right? What else can we learn from these situations? And so as far as the things that get in the way, why do we have such shallow learning in most cases? There's two, and they're related. And one is blame. And the other is bias. And there's a lot of discussion about bias or biases. There's lots of them, and they very much show up. And there's a few of them that really show up when we look at things that happened in the past and try to learn from them. Mainly hindsight bias, outcome bias, fundamental attribution error, and so on. And then blame. In addition to the biases, they basically are the mechanism. They're the short circuits, right? Because they allow us to very quickly jump to a very comfortable conclusion, and then we just say, okay, that postmortem is done. We figured out the quote-unquote root cause, and we could just move on and live happy, fulfilled lives. By the way, if you're hearing music, I work for this music company called Pandora, and so that's one of the side effects of working for a music company, is at random times you will hear music, so we can consider it a background track.
Great, thank you for the introduction. So before I forget, let me just say that now, if you're interested in knowing more about the book, there's a short link you can go to. It's bit.ly, so bit.ly/beyond-blame. That will bring you directly to the book. So if you want to get more information, that's where you should go. All right, so right now people are really shy and there are no questions, which means that I'm going to subject to Kelly and ask her to ask a question to get people to know what's going on here. And then please don't be shy, because this is how we run webinars. We really want it to be interactive. We want you to get what you want out of this. So we want you to be contributing. So, but since you're shy right now, I'll have Kelly start it.
Sure. So I really enjoyed the book. Thank you very much. And one thing I thought was really interesting about was the this sort of counterfactual statements that you talked about. And I thought that was interesting because, like, when you reflect upon a problem, your tendency is to sort of frame it in terms of things like you wish you would have done, or like I should have done this, or if only we had done this. And so I was just wondering if you could sort of talk about that a little bit when you're, reflecting on a situation, how to avoid finding yourself in this counterfactual trap.
Yeah, so counterfactuals are symptoms of essentially hindsight bias. And hindsight bias basically it's a quick conclusion that we jump to, that we trick ourselves into thinking that we knew something in the past that we actually only know now, right? And so, of course, we should have used FaceTime instead of Hangouts or something like that, right? Or vice versa. Because it's obvious to us now that that's what we should have done. The question is, was it obvious at that time? And most of the time, the answer is no, right? And I would say actually all of the time the answer is no. So when we are looking retrospectively, what we want to do is stay away from the wishful thinking that these counterfactuals are. I mean, and really these are kind of sort of almost an attempt to rewrite history, because what we're saying is, if only I did this, I didn't do that, I could have, should have, would have done that. But none of these things are actually factual. They're not actually true. It's not what happened. I also wish that Santa Claus brought presents for me every year. And for those of you listening at home, if this is the first time you hear that maybe that's not what's happening, I'm very sorry about that. It's not my fault, right? Don't blame me. But it is almost like that. It's like Tooth Fairies and Santa Claus. It is wishful thinking. Now, so counterfactuals are symptoms of this hindsight bias. And generally speaking, with biases, there's not really good news. It's extremely difficult for individuals to spot biases in themselves. In fact, Daniel Kahneman, who's been studying biases, in fact, he is sort of the person who introduced biases to the world, one of the early researchers into this, right? He received the Nobel Prize in fact, behavioral economics for some of his discoveries of biases. He says that he's no better now at spotting when he's under the influence of bias in himself than he was 40 years ago when he first started studying them.
Wow, and he's this is what he studies.
Yeah. And I don't think he's being falsely modest about this. There's two good news here. Two pieces of good news. One is, specifically with hindsight bias, the counterfactuals, it's super easy to just become mindful of the language. Could have, would have. In fact, I think somebody at Etsy had written a Chrome plugin which replaces counterfactuals in web pages with the non-counterfactual version of it. Yeah. So you can do that. You can train yourself. And so when you say you're saying, oh, I wish we would have done that, then you catch yourself, and then you could say, okay, that's the kind of the signal, that's the alarm, the alert that goes off and says, oh, what? I seem to be under the influence of this bias. What can I do? And what you can do is just ask the question, did I actually have this information at the time, in the past? Or what information did we actually have then? How did the decision that we're now sort of suffering the consequences of, good or bad, how was it possible? How did it make sense at that time? So, trying to figure out why people are calling me at this time. We can do a postmortem later. It's just like, oh, it's on every.
Wow, how many devices do you have in that room? They're all ringing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's like I think Apple like connects them all somehow. I don't even know. Hopefully that's it. Hopefully they're not too persistent. So anyway, I wish I didn't have this Apple syncing thing, and that also the Google Voice that connects to my Apple thing. So basically, it rings everywhere. Kind of a little bit of counterfactual for you.
Yeah.
So that's actually counterfactual is actually, I would say, good news about the biases. It's the one bias that's fairly easy to spot in yourself.
Because you can hear yourself saying those specific keywords that kind of like are a trigger to your mind, like, oh wait, I'm not thinking about this the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And what we want to be careful here, and we can get into that, is kind of blaming ourselves for being under the influence of bias. And so I want to be really clear that like being human means being biased. It's just how we work. And so if you want to read more about this, the Daniel Kahneman's awesome book, Thinking Fast and Slow, goes very deeply into that area. It's also very accessible and very readable and fascinating. Basically, it's how our minds, how our thinking works or doesn't work. And fundamentally, biases are when we jump to conclusions, very quick thinking based on, memory and like if I asked you, what's the capital of France? There's almost nothing you can do to prevent Paris from arising in your mind, right? So that's like it works on that kind of millisecond resolution almost, right? It's totally automatic. And it served us really well because when you have some, danger coming to you, you want to make that really quick decision and run away, right? That's fight or flight, for instance. But, generally speaking, I would say in most workplaces these days, there are no, like, wild animals. Okay, maybe this is making a big assumption. Yes, I'm sure there's some people who behave like wild animals and all that, and in which case biases are very useful as well. But in most situations, we actually benefit from slowing down our thinking and really looking at what's happening and what information we had at the time.
So I have kind of like a follow-up with that. So let's say we are in a post-mortem meeting, whatever those things are called, when something happened, and then we want to all gather and then analyze the situation. And you notice that people are doing these things, right? They are bringing the bias into situation. So as someone who is not running the meeting, what can you do to help guide the conversation to a more learning and productive level rather than just, oh, I wish that happened, or other ways of doing it wrong, essentially?
Yeah, so that's the other kind of good news of biases, is that it's a lot easier for me to spot when you're under the influence of bias than for me to do that for myself. So if you have a team that over time becomes more familiar with and comfortable with how these things manifest and what questions to ask and how to redirect the line of questioning, the easier it becomes. And that's actually, as a team, we are actually able to counteract a lot of the biases. Individually, very difficult. So to answer your specific question, though, so if somebody's saying, we could have done that and we should have done that and all this kind of stuff, if you feel like you're in a safe space, this is a very big qualifier, you can just ask a very direct question of, can we just focus on what information we had at the time? Okay, because most of the time, like so, for instance, take the phone interruption just now, right? We started this call, and we didn't talk about turning off our devices and disabling forwarding and all this kind of stuff, right? Was not top of mind, was not actually something that we were thinking about at the time. Now we are, and maybe in the future, when you're preparing for these webinars, you might be like, hey, do you have this and this, and can you turn it off, right? So that's a learning. That, by the way, we would have otherwise missed if we just got to the like, oh, you should have turned off your phone. Of course. And that's it, right? That's the conclusion. There's something wrong with me, maybe. Should have turned off the phone. Everybody knows you have phones, and you should turn them off during webinars, right? And so, but we actually would have missed the learning, which is like, oh, there's this whole thing happening that now in the future we could do something about, right? So going back to the postmortem, just ask fairly open-ended questions, and language is really important in postmortems and learning reviews and retrospectives. The questions that we generally want to stay away from are who and why. Who is obvious, right? Because that just very directly kind of like gets to the person. Why, you might have heard of this practice of 5 whys. This comes from kind of agile, retrospectives, where you basically, something happens, so you say, why? And then they say, oh, because this other thing. Why? And then you kind of go on, supposedly, until you get to something called the root cause. The problem with 5 whys, I think it's very oversimplifies what goes on, because why not 10 or 20 whys, right? The second thing is because what we're seeking here in the 5 whys approach is something called the root cause, which everybody's heard about, but it is very similar to Santa Claus because nobody's seen the root cause. And certainly not a single root cause for anything. It's just a gross oversimplification of the things, the systems that we work with. And so those are the main reasons why you want to stay away from the whys. There's a great piece by John Allspaw called The Infinite House that debunks very thoroughly the notion of the 5 whys as a valid and beneficial approach to learning from something that happened in the past. I think I answered part of the question, but I'm not sure if I answered the other part.
Well, I think part of it is you just started off with the preamble that if this is a safe space, do this. I think part of it is also a lot of the times when you are just a participant in a meeting and you kind of see the train wreck coming along, and you may or may not be in a position where you have to say, hey, people, we are not doing it wrong. Just because, I mean, you are in a retrospective, and it seems like you're distracting people from trying to get to the root cause when you're like critiquing the technique, you know what I mean, rather than the content of what being discussed. So maybe it's something that needs to happen before the meeting rather than you're in the middle of it and then realizing that, oh, okay, I feel like we are not using the right approach to discuss the problem. Getting better, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the safe space, I think it's fairly easy to determine if you're in a safe space. One of the questions you can ask is, has anybody ever been, fired, demoted, reassigned, their pay reduced somehow, maybe bonus reduced or something like that, as a result of something that they did at work? If the answer is yes, then it's probably not a safe space. And especially if the person who has the power to do that to you, maybe your boss or your boss's boss, is in that room, it's probably not a safe space. And so the behavior you'll start to observe in those kinds of postmortems is a lot of omission, covering your ass behavior, you know, and also, strangely enough, the behavior that feels really good again on the surface, somebody who participated in the outage or whatever will come and they say, "Yep, mea culpa, I did it. It was me." That makes everybody around them feel kind of comfortable because, oh yeah, well, we found the root cause. Here it is, the walking, breathing root cause. And not even wearing Santa Claus suit, believe it or not. And then everybody's like, okay, well, just don't do it again, right? And again, that's that short circuit to learning that we're talking about. We got the person, the who, and so this is also where if it was a short outage, right, or a short problem, or a small problem, then you might get the don't do it again. If it was a big problem, big outage, then, oh, well, we need to have a chat with you about maybe you need some more education. Maybe you need to be retrained. Or maybe, hold off on pushing things to production for a little while until you, learn some stuff. Or maybe don't do that again ever. And then it kind of escalates from there. And so this is actually something that's classic outcome bias, right? We judge the quality of the decisions that people have made in the past based on the outcome. That, of course, isn't known at the time. Very, very close to hindsight bias, but a little different here. And so this is how kind of the blame, the assigning of the blame happens. But also, hero worship kind of arises out of the same thing. We all have in our organizations this one person, this guy or girl, to whom we go when we really need to get something, let's say, into production really fast, right? Or when we really need that like hot fix somewhere. And there's always this person in the organization who knows how to circumvent all kinds of processes and all kinds of kind of safeguards just to get something done. Okay? And that person, when they're doing these kind of running around all the processes and safeguards, they're actually putting something, maybe the company, maybe the product, at risk, right? And yet most of the time nothing happens because this person has some experience with these things, maybe. And so we kind of celebrate this person as a hero. It's like, here's a person who, we were able to fix something really, really quickly. Never mind how they did it, but we got a good outcome out of that. So as long as the outcome is good, we're going to celebrate the person as a hero, And if the same action kind of results in a bad outcome, that same action will get that same person branded a villain or the root cause. Does this make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That it's not really so much about the actual work that they're doing, like they're getting blamed or celebrated on the outcome versus like the process that they're following to create a safe system, a safe network.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And we sort of, again, that we look at the outcome and we're like, okay, it's good. So basically everything's good. We don't have to really dig more deeply here, right? And really understand, well, why is this succeeding?
Mm-hmm.
Because, the interesting thing, and this again kind of points to the illusory nature of root cause. We all work with really complex systems, and one of the telltale signs of complex systems is you do the same thing and get a different result. Right? We've all been in situations where it's like, but that's exactly what I did last time, and I don't understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, well, that's a system, and so that the linear thinking that gets us to the root cause, the singular root cause, just doesn't work. Doesn't really match the world that we live in. So we need to do something different.
Yeah. So when you were talking, Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I just realized that some people may not know how to activate the Q&A module. Maybe that's why, because it's not obvious as everything Google Hangout is. So sorry, assigning blame. Okay, I should not do this. Maybe we should think of it in a different way. But let me just address it directly right now. If you are using the Google Hangout app, there should be on the top right corner a 3 by 3 grid icon. If you click on it, you should see something that says, it looks like a speech bubble and it says Q&A in it. And if you click that, then you can type in a question and then we can see it and then we can ask them for you. The reason why we do it this way rather than invite everybody to speak is that way we can have more viewers, because Google Hangout put a limit on how many people can speak in a Hangout. So just want to insert that public announcement before Kelly say something. Sorry for interrupting. Because I just remember that there were previous times we had this problem where people wanted to ask questions and they couldn't. And if that didn't work out, let's have plan B. So plan B is you can also go to Twitter and you can tweet at us, or you can use the hashtag #TechSpeak. So either at TechSpeakDirect or hashtag TechSpeak, and I'll keep an eye on them. So if this doesn't work out, we'll have a secondary mode of communication. All right, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
Thanks, Shuki. So, Dave, when you were talking, we were talking about this idea of safe space. So for those of you in the audience that haven't read the book, there's a big network outage that happens. They track it back to the root cause, which is this guy, Mike, issuing this command, and he gets kicked out. And it kind of brings about like a revolution at the company of like, how do we do this differently? How do we do it better to really understand what actually went wrong? And so there's this kind of this old school boss, Roger, that kind of is convinced to come around and create this new safe space where you can have like what's called a learning review to really learn about what went wrong from all parts of the company, and that it wasn't just this one guy. A lot of things ended up happening to bring the system down. So I think that we've all worked with people like Roger, who are kind of old school in their beliefs, and it seemed like he was convinced pretty easily that this is a way to go. And so I'm wondering, in your work, have you found this to be rather easy to change people's minds, to create this new kind of culture of learning and safe spaces, or do you feel pushback? And if you feel pushback, like if someone's trying to implement this at their own company, like how can they get around that pushback and bring people over?
Yeah. So how much time do you got? This is not a simple question to answer at all. And I think what you were alluding to is, in order for these kinds of practices, the new view of human error, for instance, to kind of set, to have a space, to have a place in our companies, it needs to come both from below and above, right? So, and a lot of times it does, in my experience, kind of start from below, from the people that have like the most experience with the systems, because basically they know that like if somebody from above asks them what was the root cause of this outage, right, then they're not going to know what to answer, you know. Like they'll answer something, and but it would be grossly oversimplified. So we have to kind of ask the questions of like, what do people like Roger, like a CIO or CTO of a reasonably big company, what do they care about? And I think what they care about are things like resilience, things like innovation, things like retention of great employees that we fight so hard to find, you know. And so the language, how you would talk to somebody like Roger is in terms of those kinds of business outcomes. because there has been research, right? And a lot of this work, I have to be very clear, is coming from about 40 years of human factors, resilience engineering, cognitive psychology research that has been used pretty effectively in a lot of different fields, like aerospace and transportation, healthcare, and so on, right? So we're standing on the shoulders of giants that have sort of studied that and implemented a lot of these approaches with the intention of actually making those industries safer, higher performing, more resilient. Like the reasons that planes don't fall out of the sky, and they do, but not that often. The reason that plane travel is as safe as it is in part because of a lot of this work that's been happening in the airline sort of travel. Anytime that there's an incident, there is a postmortem, a learning review. Anytime there's a near miss, there's a postmortem, there's a learning review. And yes, there's blame there. That's still, to totally eradicate blame is a 100-year goal. Let's put it this way. But I think possible. Simply because it's not that helpful. But in any case, the reason that there is a lot of safety in let's say airline travel is because they've implemented a lot of this thinking, right? And you to a C-level executive, you can point to some of those things, right? At the end of the day, though, I mean you're quite right. We are really talking about culture change, organizational culture change, which some people don't think is actually possible. Or at the very least, is very, very difficult. I'm a bit more of an optimist. I have seen companies, and me and my partner, we do work with companies directly on this. We teach a sort of a one-day workshop to get people familiar with a lot of these concepts. And we've seen, for instance, we work with one sort of bank company, and it's been amazing to watch their transformation that I think we sort of started. We kind of kick-started it, to the point where now they have this sort of concept of almost like a Bill of Rights for postmortem participants. As in, cool. Like, if you're participating in a postmortem in this company, you will not be blamed, you will not be punished, you'll not be demoted, all that stuff, right? So, like, those things are like almost like the Miranda rights or something like that you read to somebody. Okay, kind of different context, but you get the idea, right? They are there, right? And they are so those kinds of and so that culture, that approach has been embraced by everybody from C-level executives to client services folks across the company, not just engineers.
Wow, that's really neat.
Yeah, so it is. I'm optimistic that it is possible. Because there are business outcomes, positive business outcomes attached to this way of thinking.
Yeah, it's not just about being nice and people feeling better. It's like, no, you're actually going to have a higher quality product. It's going to be better for your company overall if you do this.
Totally. And I have to, and also, like, I can judge it sort of by myself. I'm a really skeptical person, and I got exposed to like this sort of blameless postmortems through John Allspaw, who is now the CTO of Etsy. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. And when I first came in contact with this, I mean, my reaction was like, this is just some hippie bullshit, Like, yeah, it works for Etsy, but Etsy is all about handcrafted, all this stuff. I work for like a financial institution, which is where I spent most of my previous career. It's like nobody's gonna buy this here. But the more deeply I dug into it, and the more I saw how very, very serious and safety-minded industries are embracing this way of thinking with very positive results. At some point you kind of have this paradigm shift where the old way just stops making sense, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, that paradigm shift was really around kind of really grasping the complexity of the systems we work with.
Yeah, I'm wondering maybe it's easier to get started with just yourself, like rather than being in a room with your team trying to find the root cause of whatever thing that you're looking into. Perhaps it's like a simpler system almost, right? It's just me. I'm trying to improve my life whichever way you want to. Do you think like there are ways you can apply the same technique to like a more personal level, just so that you can get your feet wet and you start being aware of all these issues before you bring it up to your team, before you have share your learning, right? Like if you already have some positive experience just by yourself.
Yeah. So humans are complex. So humans are complex and adaptive creatures, and certainly societies and groups and teams and companies are exactly that as well. Having said that, and this is kind of a little bit in the book, I can tell you a sort of this is very personal work for me. I have two kids. I have an older son who, for quite some time, the usual kind of comfortable story is, he was quote unquote bad at math, right? Like we've either been there or know people that are there. It's like, and so what's happening there is just very, very clearly like we've attached bad at math to the personality, to the person, right? And so, I was working with my son on this for a little while, and he was convinced that he was bad at math. I was convinced that he was bad at math. But then after a while, because I was doing this work also, I was like, well, wait a second, let me just stop here. Like, he's not coming to, our little math homework session trying to piss me off or trying to, like, figure out a way to, like, not do, get all upset and throw papers around and all this kind of stuff, right? That's not the point. He's actually genuinely trying to learn. He really wants to understand this. And there's something in the system in which he sort of exists, in which he operates, of which he's part, that's not working for him. And maybe it's the way that the stuff is presented. And maybe it's the time of day. Or maybe he's hungry. Or who knows? And there's like, when you start digging, there's any number of really fairly, any number of explanations really that you can come up with, right? But the point is, it has very little to do, if anything, with the person, with the personality, and it has a lot to do with the system in which this person exists. And so once I was able to kind of see that, math started going a lot better. I mean, to the point where now he is actually thinking that he's good at math, right? Which, okay, yes, he can take part of the credit, but there's also something that changed in the system that he's operating in. So yeah, I mean, we can definitely like apply a lot of this thinking in our own life, in relationships, and not just at work.
But in your example, it almost feel like it's a mindset change. You didn't end up identifying anything specific that you needed to change. It's more like now you're more open to the idea that perhaps he's not bad at math, and that influence your decision almost subtly, that you don't really know at the end what changed, but something changed, and now he feels that he's actually good at math.
Yeah, I mean, I think we tried, like, having recognized that it's not him, because it's like when we think, oh, it's it's that person, then it's like we might as well go home, because it's like, well, we can't change the personality of someone, right? And just in the context of, like, let's say outages, oh, that person is always careless, that kind of thinking. Okay, so that's it, we're done. Nothing more to do except to try to prevent that careless person from being affecting some kind of change, right? So, and the same thing here. Once you go below or beyond the very simplistic explanations of why something isn't working, then we could try. We have the freedom to try a lot of different things. right? Oh, let's try a different approach. Let's try a different textbook. Let's try a different time of day. Oh, maybe you're the kind of math learner that really, needs something tangible to hold, sort of physical objects to move, because you can't yet keep it in your head. Those kinds of things become possible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the key here is that it's not I think a lot of people are looking for solutions. It's not replacing blaming people with some other magical thing that just then will solve every problem magically. It's more like removing this obstacle from your way of thinking, right? Like once you don't have this shortcut that you can take, then your brain has to go look. Well, unless you just give up and go home anyway. I mean, that's also a possibility. Just don't run post-mortem and just keep trying random things and hope something will work better next time. But if you're not going down that path, then just because you don't have this shortcut to take, then your mind will pay attention to other things and come up with different ways to do things. I feel like that may not be obvious from just like the kind of the first level description of like, oh yeah, sure, blaming people is not productive, but why would that bring positive change in your organization?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Again, we're not going for the feel-good hippie stuff. Is a side effect of something actually really powerful, which is exactly like you said. We're going beyond the really surface, the obvious, the default ways of thinking, and really getting to identify lots of conditions, some of which we have no control over. Like you might have a postmortem or a learning review. I actually, just for the record, I really prefer learning reviews because I think postmortems have this connotation of, somebody died and somebody needs to be like, yeah, exactly, right? It's like, and also there's a very long practice of blameful postmortems. So when we add blameless postmortems, it's like, yes, it's really good, but it's like blame less.
It's an oxymoron.
It works in practice, right? And on some level, like, who cares what you call it? And at the same time,
but like bias runs deep, right? Like the more you can get people to think differently, the more hopeful the situation is, I feel like.
Yeah, like if you get an invitation, right, in your calendar to a postmortem versus to a learning review, right?
Yeah.
The learning review, like learning, that's the outcome of a learning review. That's what we're after. It's encoded in the name, so it kind of it helps set the context.
Exactly. So I just want to back up a little bit. You were mentioning kind of like the superficial response of blame to like a really complex system. There was a diagram you shared in the book. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. It's Cynefin. Is that how you say it?
So it's Cynefin. I don't know how.
Oh, I was way off.
Okay, it's a Welsh word, and I don't speak Welsh, but I still don't understand how that combination of letters produces that sound. So.
Cool. Okay, so Cynefin, it's spelled Cynefin, and it's sort of like this grid of 4 different types of, I guess, complexity. There's obvious, complicated, complex, and chaotic, and then in the center there's this like whole of like the unknown. And so if you could just like kind of talk a little bit about the learning reviews, like as they apply, like can a learning review teach you anything about an environment that was chaotic, or is it like tailored to any of the specific types of complexities?
Mm-hmm. So that framework that you're referring to, Cynefin, was created by a Welsh fellow by the name of David Snowden, and it's actually gotten quite a lot of play in the intelligence community, and in business. Actually, there's a great Harvard Business Review article about how to sort of figure out which of the 5 domains you're in. So you describe them. There's the obvious, there's the complicated, there's the complex, there's the chaotic, and then there's the disorder, sort of, or unknown in the middle. And it's a sense-making framework. It helps us understand which domain we're in and act appropriately. Okay? So how this relates to postmortems is basically, let's put it this way. If we're running a franchise, something that we've done again and again and again for 50 years, we've actually, over time, made that system very, very obvious or simple. And how we know that is we can hire anybody to operate the frying station at McDonald's, for instance, right? They just need 2 minutes of introduction to which button to push and all that, okay?
Right.
Now, if we think about shipping software, how many times have we in a situation where we have done that thing before, this new feature that we're shipping out?
If it's new, you've never done it.
Almost never. New language, new framework, new operating system, cloud, microservice, you fill in the whatever buzzword, Docker, you name it, right? So I think I'm missing drones and Bitcoin, and then we're totally.
You would have all of them.
Yeah, just everything. Just hashtag all the keywords and all that. So. Okay, so if that's the case, so if we're not repeating the same thing over and over again, we're probably located in or operating more either in the complicated or the complex domains. And the difference between them is the complicated domain is one where with enough expertise, we can actually figure out the answer. So if you ever listen to NPR like I do, there's the what is it? Car Talk. Anyway, it's like these two brothers that are car mechanics with a lot of experience, and people call in and they make some sound, and these two brothers go, "Oh yeah, that's that's the carburetor," and I'm like, "Okay, well, that's great." I have no idea. And so basically, what they're doing is because they've had many years of experience, right? They could sort of generally point to it's the carburetor. And so then you take your car to the car shop, and then they open the carburetor, and they sort of figure out what actually is going on. So that's the complicated domain, right? Where with enough experience, you can figure things out. And so sometimes when we work with software, that's where we are, right? And sometimes we're in a situation where we're doing something completely new. We cannot really predict. We don't know where the noise is coming from. We cannot predict how doing something, what outcome it's going to have, right? And we don't know, like, if you're working in a startup and, there's very existential, complex questions of, like, let's say product market fit. We don't know in advance which one is going to kind of hit, right? And so in that domain, that's the complex kind of adaptive domain. What we do is, instead of relying on experience, we formulate some ideas that are cogent, that might possibly work, that hopefully won't take our company or organization down, and we try them, ideally in parallel, right? And so most of the time in our work, we are in between complicated, where we can rely on experience, and complex, where we're doing something totally new. And based on our ability to recognize which domain we're in, we should act differently, because expertise in a complex adaptive domain, not that useful. Because we've never done it before.
Because everything's brand new, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then the chaotic stuff is basically when there are sort of, if you ever run a hackathon, what you're doing is you're removing, like, constraints. Go work on whatever you want, and right? And so it has some properties of the complex because you can't predict how it's going to go, right? And it has much less constraints around it, right? No, don't worry about the language. Don't worry about the framework. Just go build something cool, right? And so that's a very good way to, like, unleash creativity. And that's also where sometimes, like when there's a really bad kind of outage or problem, this is sometimes where we wind up in very chaotic sort of situations where we can't see through the fog for anything. And so there, what you do, it's sort of how you operate is you just do something. There's absolutely no way to predict, what might possibly work, right? So in a complex adaptive one, we'll formulate some theories and kind of run some experiments. In the in the chaotic one, we just do something. It's like when you got a bunch of toddlers running around with knives. You walk into that room. Sorry, trigger warning possibly for parents. You don't just walk in and you go, let me observe and formulate a kind of a theory about how would be the best parallel experiments, and I'm okay with maybe some of the kids, kind of hurting themselves. You walk in and you go, stop, put the knife down, right? That's it. Like, you don't care. It's like you scream, you do a clown face to distract them. It doesn't matter what you do. But that action will change that system. Hopefully it will scare the kids enough to like drop the knives and stuff. And then you can be like, all right, now we could do something. Hopefully this makes sense. So that's the framework to think about complexity. So in our workshop we do like some exercises to really bring it home to, because it can be really heady and theoretical. And the exercises have to do with cooking the potato, but that's for there's 4 different ways to cook the potato. Let me preview that.
Okay. That's
Great.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're actually almost out of time, so probably won't take more questions. But I'm very intrigued by the potatoes. Is that in the book, or is that separate? Okay, I have to admit, I have not read the book, so if you have not figured that out yet.
It's all good. It's a short one. It's like a couple of hours of read. It's only about 80 pages. Mostly I did that because I'm very optimistic, and I start reading the 500-page books, and I make it to about 40 or 50, and then I have a whole stack of them.
Right.
So I wanted to write a book that people hopefully would read. But yeah, it is, I think, somewhat in the book, and hopefully it makes this whole very dry concept of complexity very real for people. And the reason that we talk about complexity at all is because all that stuff that we talk about, the really simplistic understandings, the root cause, the blame, the jumping to conclusions, the simple conclusions, the simple stories, they all are kind of sort of okay if we're operating a very simple, obvious system. I would, and I say kind of sort of because not really, but like you could sort of get away with it, right? The moment we're operating 100,000 servers, or we're operating an airline, or we even open up this laptop, which has probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 billion lines of code. I'm sorry, that's nothing to do with, cooking potatoes, at your local McDonald's or whatever, and it's incredibly complex. And so if we don't recognize that we are in a different kind of field and domain, and we still continue thinking that very linearly, root cause, all that, yeah, it just doesn't really fit. So that's the reason that we talk about complexity in this context.
That makes a lot of sense. Like what works in one situation may turn out to be not adequate for another one, and it's important to identify them.
That's exactly it.
Cool. All right. So I have been kind of watching the clock, and I suddenly realized that the hour is up. So thank you so much for explaining to us and kind of getting the ball rolling. I feel like a lot of it, like you said, is the mindset. It's like, well, once you realize that we should not just put the blame on someone and then wash our hands off and call the problem solved. So I would encourage everyone to go read the book, myself included. And so once again, if you want to get to the book, the link is bit.ly, so bit.ly, and then /Beyond Blame. And we'll send out, and well, for sure, like in the next issue of the newsletter, we'll put that link in as well. And I will also try to get the link for the, was it a book or an article like that you mentioned, the Infinite House? And then Think Fast and Slow. I feel like those will also be interesting material to go through as well. So I'll
Yep.
definitely include those as well.
Fantastic.
Yay, thank you so much.
Yes,
All
thank
pleasure.
you.
right. Bye.
Bye.